Hey guys, this is Mr. Shell, and in this tutorial we're going to go over how to create an appropriate bar graph. So we went over line graph in different tutorials and how to make a trend line, and this one we're looking at bar graphs. And so remember, it's appropriate to use a bar graph when you're looking at kind of counted data in certain categories. So a way it's a lot of times used will be to indicate the number of responses in a certain category. And we have an example down here. We have a graph in the table. So if we were looking at favorite activities for MGLVA high school students, and we had these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 choices, each person who answered must choose one of these 5 choices. They must put, or their answer must be in one of those categories. And if we have data like that, then it's really good to present it in a bar graph like what we have over here, right? We can see the different numbers of people who fall into each of those categories, their favorite activity, and then it's easy to see that the most popular activity would be visiting with friends, right? Because that has the highest line. So creating a graph, remember these are the same for any graph you're going to create, whether it's a line graph or a bar graph, is decide where the information is going to be graphed. So are you going to use a program, grid paper, where are you going to put the information? Then you're going to choose a scale so the graph becomes large enough to fill most of the available space. Remember, if we have a whole sheet of paper or we have a big area, we want to fill the whole thing. We don't want it to be this tiny little graph in the corner and then a bunch of blank grid paper. Then each regularly spaced division of the graph should equal a convenient constant value. So we should count up on the x and the y axis by something that makes sense, and it should be consistent also. And we'll go over that as we're making our example. And then of course make sure to label each axis with the quantity and the unit being graphed. Remember, you always want to put the unit on your axis label. That way you don't have to put the units next to each number because you've already put the units on your axis label. And then you'll plot each point. If you're doing a line graph, you'll plot more. If you plot more than one bar on the same graph, if you're doing a bar graph, you want to use a different color, ideally, to distinguish the data. Now I know in the previous one here, right, oh, I gotta go back one more. They're not different colors. Ideally, you want to use a different color if it's at all possible. That just makes it easier to see the differences. And then of course give your graph an informative title. Now another reminder here, the horizontal axis, called the x-axis, is used for the quantity that can be controlled or adjusted, and that's called the independent variable. So in our example, what activity the students would do would be the independent variable, because that's what can be controlled, right? The vertical axis, or the y-axis, is used for the quantity that responds to the changes, right? So the number of people who select a category, that would be the dependent variable, and that goes on the y-axis. So now we're going to go ahead and draw an example here. There we go, I have my pen out. So you see up top here we have number of students, and then this would be like their favorite food. We have pizza, tacos, steak, sushi, and bibimbap. Most of you probably don't know what bibimbap is. It's a very common Korean food dish, and it's really good. It's one of my favorite foods, so that's why I've made the results. So bibimbap is the most popular food item in our survey here. So I first need to decide which variable is going to go on the x-axis, which one's going to go on the y-axis. Remember, the x-axis, this horizontal one, is the independent variable, and that's what the researchers, or that's what we can control, and what we can control is the categories of food that we ask people about, right? So that's going to be on our x-axis, the food. And so I'll go ahead and label that right now. So I'm going to label food type. And then the y-axis is the dependent variable, that's the vertical axis, and that's kind of like the data. And that's a good trick to remember, that the dependent variable is the data that you measure. So our data, what we measured or what we collected, the data we collected, would be the number of students. So number of students is going to go on the y-axis. Number of students. And that's a little bit smushed in there, but I think you guys can read that. So now we know what's going to go on the x-axis and what is going to go on the y-axis. Now our next step is to look at the scale, or what each of these grid lines is going to represent, what number. Now down here on the x-axis, it's easy. We don't have numbers, we have types of food. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 types of food, and so we're going to have 5 different bars. And so I'm going to say we'll make each of these spaces a 1 by 1 box, or one by however many it goes up row will be our bars. So here I'll write pizza for this bar, and then we'll skip one, so we have space, tacos, skip one, and then steak, skip one, and then sushi, skip one, bibimbap. So there we go, we have our x-axis labeled. Now we need to select number for our y-axis. And so to do that, you should look at your minimum and your maximum. So our minimum right here, we have 25, and our maximum, max, would be 250. So we know this has to go up to 250, and it does not need to go all the way down to 0 because we don't have anything under 25, so we'll just have a big white space if we start at 0. So we'll start this at 25. So we'll put, well, normally we'll put like 25 here, and so actually in our case we will go down to 0, but you don't necessarily have to. And then you want to take up all of this, or most of the grid paper, so it's easy to see. And so if we go up by 25 each line, that would get us taking up pretty much the entire grid here. Have to squeeze this in here, 175, 200, 225, and perfectly we come to 250 at the top. So now the only thing left to do, or one of the only thing left to do, is plot our data. So we look at pizza has 56 people. So I'll go to my pizza column here, go up 56, and 56 would be about right here maybe. So I'll do that, and then I would color this in with whatever I have. Okay, so there's our pizza. Now I'll go to tacos, and actually I can change color here. Tacos are 25, so tacos, that's easy. It's right up to this first line here. Here's our tacos. Color that in there. Okay, then we have our steak at 120. So 120 up to about right here. Here's our steak. There's our steak bar. It's pretty popular, more popular than pizzas and tacos. And then we have sushi. Sushi is another one of my favorite foods, actually. In sushi, we had 68 for our data. So 68 will be a little bit above the middle, about right there. And then my favorite, bibimbap, all the way up there at the top at 250. And so bibimbap all the way down to 250. And so that's why ideally we use different colors. We don't have to, but it just makes it easier to see differences sometimes and see the differences between the bars. So we need to do one last thing here before we're done. We need to add our title. And remember, the title should be descriptive enough that someone would just have to read the title and they would understand. They would read the title, they would read your axes labels, and they should understand what your graph is about. They should understand the information in your graph. So we can, up here on our title, we can write favorite oops, I spelled food wrong. Food of MGLVA students. So favorite food of MGLVA students. And then we can see clearly there were 5 choices, and we can see the number of students that selected each food type. Okay, so I hope that helped, and I'll see you guys next time.